And we're live. Welcome back, everyone. Onan here, and I've got Midnight Philosopher bright and early. How are you today?
Good morning, Onan. I'm happy to be here with you again, ready to talk spicy topics.
Yeah, I'm just going to head over here to Twitter, and I'm going to repost that so people know that it's uh, live now. YouTube. So it's hard to find the sweet spot to when to do these things. It's a combination of when it kind of works for us and when people are perhaps be able to join or whatever. I think we had a pretty good crowd the last time we did this 2 weeks ago on a Saturday morning. So if this seems like it works for people, I think this will be kind of maybe the target and time for us.
Yeah, that'll be pretty nice. I hope the same people show up.
Yeah, yeah. So I kind of it's always I always kind of see what I feel like the pulse of Twitter is over the last week, and this is a topic that um, it's not necessarily new in the news, but I just been more aware of this question for a couple of reasons. So the topic, if you can't see it, is there a true church, and how do we know which one it is? And I brought this up within the context of uh, so there's a variety of factions that are at least in the circle of people that I kind of engage with on Twitter. So of course you've got the regular Catholics, you got the trad Catholics, and even within the trad, and then you have SSPX Catholics, which I think are kind of, that's a gray area for me. You have Sedevacantists, and then we have some Orthodox, although they're not near as vocal as the Catholics are, especially the trad Catholics. And then what I've also especially noticed is just a lot of very heated and not very uplifting, and I would say not very productive engagement between the trad Catholics and, let's say, the more outspoken kind of biblical Christians, just to use that term kind of broadly. And I just it makes me sad to see it because stepping back, I think to myself, like, who's actually persuaded by any of this? And in particular, let's say someone stepped in and watched this conversation, is not even Christian, and they're like, I want to I might become a Christian, and where do I go? I I just don't see a lot of good fruits bearing out online that would say, where someone would be able to say, "Oh, that really appeals to me. That resonates with me. That's the Lord I want to serve." Are you? Maybe I got blinders on, and maybe this is just the Twitter effect, but it's just. I just don't know what people are trying to do here. What are we trying to accomplish in this very, very opinionated, uncharitable, kind of condescending debate that really goes across all sides of the spectrum? It's not just one group, I don't think, although I think some are more guilty of it than others.
Yeah, I don't know. It's there is this whole kind of this apologetic spectacle that people try to one up each other and who's got access to the most pure form of Christianity, and a lot of them are a bunch of they kind of like taking low blows at each other.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I kind of agree with you. The more I see it, even as someone who grew up, I'm as a cradle Catholic,
Mhm.
it's like it's one of those things that's just like profoundly discouraging, and then it kind of just seems petty at the end of the day. And you're right. I think it's I mean, to put it in superficial terms, it's like really terrible marketing for people that aren't Christian, or if they did have any curiosity about Christianity, this is like the opposite of what you want to be showing them.
Yeah, and I would say, as someone who is also a cradle Catholic, I'll be honest with you, the stuff I see from the Catholics online just decreases my confidence in being Catholic. I mean, if I'm being perfectly honest, I see that and I'm like, wow, I'm less sure about this than I was before I met these people.
Yeah, I think because even on the Catholic side, you'd hope that they step up their game, and you kind of want to root for the home team, but some Catholics will take really cheap shots or misrepresent the Protestant point of view. I think if both sides, both Protestant and both Catholic, could engage in some self-examination, because I think the difficult thing with apologetics is that, regardless of what side you're arguing from, there does seem to be the sense of you're very committed to your conclusions, whatever they may be, whether it's sola scriptura, or the perfect balance between scripture and tradition, or faith-based salvation, or some mix of works and faith-based salvation, whatever it is. I think in apologetics, you're sort of so committed to your
Yeah,
position, and you kind of
yeah,
work backwards from that, right? And then
yeah,
oftentimes you'll fall into the temptation of making a caricature of your opponent.
yeah, yeah. You're more on the offense and
Mhm.
arguing rather than listening, and I think that's the part that's really missing in all this is stopping long enough to
Mhm.
like listen and give people the benefit of the doubt, because like you said, I think it's very common for people to kind of jump to these absurd caricatures of people that, like, let's be honest, that's not actually what they meant, right? And it's just not very, it's not constructive. I just and it makes me wonder if people are actually want to convert anyone, or if it's more just puffing my chest out because I'm right here. I'm going to remind you all that I'm right, or I'm going to let it be known when you die and find out that I'm right, that I was right. Like there's just there seems to be sort of this self-congratulatory approach to it more than actual attempting to catechize people, because as far as apologetics go, I really am starting to think less and less that let's say conversion to a different faith is intellectually based. I think for some people it can be, but I just don't think it's an intellectual logical argument. Like I'll see people online, they'll be like, I'm not Catholic because I read the Bible, and then you'll hear Catholics say, I'm Catholic because I read the Bible, and I quite honestly, I think they might both be right. And I that's why I just feel not in a position to tell someone that they're stupid or wrong because they come to a different conclusion, even one that as a Catholic, I think I have to believe is wrong. Because, and this kind of gets back to a question I had or observation I made, I think the last week is, one thing that does trouble me about all this is this can't be what our Lord wanted, right? Presumably our Lord wanted us to be united in some way, and so I would hope everyone could agree that the Lord did not set out with the idea of I'm going to create this movement, this church that's going to fracture and have this and that and left and right and Protestants and all that. I have a hard time believing that's what God intended, but at the same time, I'm like, well, how do I put this? He didn't exactly make things crystal clear, right? There, like I said, I think you can read Scripture and come to a lot of different reasonable, even if not correct, conclusions to support a very wide range of viewpoints on what's biblical Christianity or not. And I just wonder why that is. Is that a feature? Is that a bug? Like how did we get to this point? If as we believe, regardless of your denomination, that Christ is Lord, He's the second person of the Trinity. How do we end up in this place? Is what I would like to know.
That is, yeah. It would be interesting to read about um, those first few centuries of Christianity. I do remember in
Yeah.
undergrad. And this is really vague because it wasn't my primary area of study. I didn't retain all the information I could have or should have. But I did take a class in early Christianity, and one thing that one of my no longer as lucid recollections, but I remember the impression of just like, when reading about some of the church fathers and those first few centuries is that there's a lot that we take for granted as always having been that wasn't like
Yes.
there was a certain amount
Yeah.
of like, here we have inherited these great texts and these great oral traditions, but now we have
Yeah.
to negotiate what they mean and kind of, canonize it and formalize it. Even before the Council of Nicaea, there was already a lot of just like discussion about how do we interpret like, the two natures of Christ, and what does it mean to be both divine and human, and what is the presence of the Eucharist. You might lean in something more mystical about the idea of the presence of Christ, and then of course throughout the centuries it develops into something that's hyper defined as transubstantiation, which in some ways like it's more about selecting your preferred descriptive language, but
Yeah.
it's still, of course, because it's like the central mystery of Christianity. You can't actually ever articulate it in a way that's like definitive, but you just sort of pick,
Cor-
yeah, you just sort of pick what maybe makes the most sense to like the core group of Christians or Catholics at that time. But it is I think that the difficulty that I see as well, which I think is exactly what you're saying, is that it shifts the focus to, can you commit to the correct checklist of beliefs and theological positions? Because no one is really debate, all these people that you see debating, no one is really debating like, are you treating your neighbor with enough charity, or are you sufficiently detached from worldly goods so you can
Mhm.
orient yourself towards deeper spirituality? They're not really debating those things that Jesus called for, but they are debating sort of, yeah, what checklist do you adhere to?
Yeah, and I think what I kind of keep coming back to in my mind is like, okay, what seems to be the central message of the gospel? It seems to focus heavily on, you know, loving your neighbor, um, loving your neighbor, loving your enemy, being kind and patient. And I know that people are going to say, oh, this is all, liberal nonsense, but that I think that is kind of what it is. It's not about, I mean, he was very much reacting against the Pharisees and kind of the performative religious, practices and things like that. I think, sometimes I think even the mass, like, as Catholics, the mass is central to our faith, and like one of the questions I have is like, well, the Lord didn't even institute the mass until like 2 days before he died, 3 days, the day before he died, I should say, right? Like he wasn't having mass with his disciples until then. And I'm not saying that is inconsistent with it, mass being central, but it, it feels like what let's just take the trads for example. Let's just say where you have this very ornate, elaborate, rubric filled uh, mass that it just doesn't seem to resemble really much at all the Last Supper and how our Lord spoke in the Gospels. That's a stumbling block for me a little bit, or at least a reason why I just can't really get on board with the trad idea, and why I think I understand, at least in principle, why the church was trying to, what they say, open the doors and let some fresh air in. So that's like one thing that I'm like, you know is this something that sort of develops over time? And the other thing I want to mention while I'm thinking of it is this: whether we like it or not, history is told by the victors, right? And um I think it's hard to find a truly objective view on any aspect of history, especially coming from those who believe, the ultimate, the institution, whatever that's being defended, if you will. Like even heretics, like I think heresy gets this really um, pejorative idea, but for the most part, heresy was, a division between um, good, loving, faithful Christians or Catholics who realized they disagreed on how to answer a thus far unanswered question, right? Heresy
Hmm.
doesn't really arise from departing from an established truth. It arises from a disagreement about how to answer a thus far unanswered truth, right? And so the side that wins, if you will, is the truth, and those that quote unquote lost, so to speak, are the heretics, and their name, hard to find out. What do they say? It's hard to find a heretic that loves chastity. Just kind of this, you know painting of the losers, if you will, and I think in a light that isn't actually reflective of how they were coming into the disagreement, and also I think glosses over the fact that there was sincere room for disagreement at that point in time, because like it excuse me, like it or not, a lot of these things, whether it's transubstantiation or whatever, are not really clearly spelled out in scripture. And so you're, like you said, you're trying to work through these things and find language to describe these things. And I think it's just sad, because it feels like a lot of the serious disagreements that we see arise from the fact that a lot of this stuff simply isn't that clear.
Yeah, no, you're right. It kind of a related tangent, especially with just well, kind of the idea of like all of these, like, let's say the legalism and the technical language. I heard a really interesting sermon that I think I messaged you about it a couple days ago, but the readings for that day were it's that passage in the gospel that, Jesus is like, I didn't come here to abolish the law and fulfill the law. And that, not
Yeah.
something like, not a day will pass where any single letter
Yeah.
or will be
Yeah.
struck from the law. And then the priest, who's a fairly young, newer priest, he sort of, one thing I really appreciated about that homily is he kind of explicitly pointed out that there's a tension there because, I think one of the letters from St. Paul to the Colossians or something, where St. Paul was talking about having this freedom uh,
Yeah.
in believing in Christ, and St. Paul had he sort of undone certain things, like circumcision was no longer a mandate, which is huge for Jewish religious identity at the time, and then also no longer enforcing a prohibition on pork, for instance. And there were just
Yeah.
a lot of things about the style and manner of Jewish worship, and the sort of 600 whatever of the Levitical code. Like there was like 600 smaller laws beyond the Ten Commandments, and how none of those became relevant anymore. And so you have this kind of conflict between what Jesus says about, no, he came to fulfill the law and none of the commandments will be undone. And then St. Paul seeming to say a different thing. Well, anyway, like the punchline of that was the priest kind of said that, like, I guess Jesus didn't mean the letter of the law, and he was talking about the spirit or the essence of the law, and how everything was really, all of those small dietary restrictions and worship prescriptions were like, um they were culturally and culturally in the cultural and historical context, they were supposed to be like guardrails to help change the Jewish people's internal state. And then I guess the whole point was Jesus was distilling it into like the spirit of the law and the spirit of the Ten Commandments. So I don't know. On the one hand, that there was it was an interesting scriptural analysis, and it had a certain philosophical depth to it. But I really enjoyed it. I think it was a really well done homily. And then the only thing that kind of made it a little funny and ironic, and I you can tell me what you think, was that then he said that the Ten Commandments are the most important, and they're at the heart of living the Christian moral life, and how humans are just because of our state and original sin, we need guardrails to kind of keep us on the path to God. But that like
Yeah.
these laws and these guardrails are something that the church keeps reflecting on, because yeah, it has to be sensitive to the culture and the historical context. But then he kind of talks about then the priest mentioned that that blue examination of conscience card that you get when you line up for confession, and how that's why there's more than just 10 bullet points, because each commandment still has more detail to apply to practical life, and the church is very interested in kind of guiding our practical day to day. But then he kind of ends with a big heavy hitter of like, which is why an example is like Humane Vitae, where the church has a zero tolerance policy on these things, and it's
Mhm.
and then it's it was interesting that he kind of talked about how it was about the spirit of the law, but then he out of nowhere doubles down on Humane Vitae, which hadn't really been a talking point the entire homily. But he doubles down on like how it's like a no compromise, like zero tolerance policy, and all the things forbidden in Humane Vitae, and even if it's difficult, we have to obey. And then so all of a sudden, from sort of discussing Jewish legalism in its historical context, then he doubles down on something that is also very legalistic. And I don't know, I guess you could I'll defer to you on how you think that kind of legalism fits in the current cultural and historical context. But anyway, that was a whole TED Talk. Sorry for taking too much time on that. But yeah, it was just like this idea of legalism in the one true church, and it somehow like boiling down to the hard lines are often about correct belief and sex.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think that's a very, very good, because I think it reflects an ongoing tension throughout history. And I don't know if it's so much a kind of this seasonal, the cyclical thing where people, Aristotle said that the virtue is the mean between extremes, and I think there is some merit to that idea, that we kind of are often waffling, or trying to find, like, threading that middle ground is not easy. And for a period of time, either individuals or society, or let's say the church, for a period of time, kind of finds himself pointed a little more on the one extreme side. And so they kind of try to correct, but maybe overcorrect and go to the opposite extreme. And they're like, okay, we got to you know, it, it's sort of like how a sailboat, I think, goes through the. I'm not a sailor, but you're kind of going at an angle to the wind, so you cut this way, and then you kind of cut back and use the wind in the opposite direction. You're kind of in this back and forth, trying to find that straight line that probably doesn't even exist, right? And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here. And I think that's why I think, like, I think even Vatican II, I think Vatican II was necessary. Now, whether it kind of overshot it the other way, I think that's certainly up for debate.
Hmm.
But I think the idea that everything was all good and well before before Vatican II, I just see this a lot, where people are like, "Oh, how did this happen? Everything was great. Look at, we had the great, the mass and clarity of teaching, and um, what people get in their modern, let's say, TLM parish and priest, is probably not very reflective of the average Catholic parish, let's say, in the 1940s and 1950s. And I think there was an overdue course correct needed, that probably was overdue, and then it kind of boiled over into Vatican II, that I think, certainly became, I think, carried away and led to a lot of problems. And of course, a lot of traditionalists would say, well, that just proves that the whole thing was wrong. And I'm like, I don't know that it does. I think something was needed. And so, rather than scrapping it all and going back to, like, the real, like you said, kind of the most legalistic view of things, which I don't think is actually what was going on when you in the well, maybe it was. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't live in the 1950s, so I don't know. But I think that's the tension that we're constantly dealing with. That, I'm sensitive to. But I think I would like to see people on all sides of the aisle just be a little more humble and, respectful of where people are at on that journey. We're all on kind of a different stage of the journey. And if we're being fair, I think, kind of going back to your example from the scriptures, and this is one of there's something for everyone. There are quotes of the scripture that I think give the, let's say, the kind of once saved, always saved Christian a lot of ammunition, and then there are obviously some that gives the, more the Catholic view ammunition. I think it's incorrect to say it's clearly, favors one side or the other, and that's one of the struggles I have as a Catholic. Is like, well, why did the Lord leave this seemingly open-ended and open to confusion? I genuinely don't know what to think about that.
Yeah, I know that there was a comment a little bit, a few minutes ago from our buddy here, Mike Pinkowski, who said
Mhm.
the necessity of the work to find language to describe these doctrines necessitates the papacy and church structures. And to an extent, I would agree in the sense that, like, in order to practically put a stop to constant debates, I think there is a practical need for establishing a central authority and a central structure. But it's still, when it comes to believing let's say the divinity of the inspiration or the indefectibility of the institution, you still do have to. It is like there's still a leap of faith involved, even if you can acknowledge that there's a practical need for unity to sort of establish a central governing structure. It doesn't exactly solve your problems about it. It's sort of like there's a certain point where you'll just stop asking questions so that you know you don't put yourself into a cyclone of doubts and questions and potential quote unquote heresies.
Yeah, I mean, when I see the kind of the debate between sort of the Catholic apologists and the Protestants, I mean, I totally agree that the strongest argument against Protestantism is the fact that you do end up in a kind of a bath of uncertainty and relative relativism. It's funny, you'll see these, quote unquote biblical Christians, which I don't think are generally affiliated with a particular denomination, but they say we all agree on the core things, which I don't know that they do, but so I, I totally agree with the practical utility, at least, of a governing body that can just decide what the law is and lay it down. And in many ways, I also kind of getting back to what I said earlier, it doesn't make sense to me that the Lord would in fact have been had it in his mind that people could break off and have like actually contradictory views of morals and God and all that, and that so someone has to be right. I'm all on board with that. What I think we have to be a little more humble about as Catholics is saying, well, because someone has to be right, therefore we must be the ones that are right. Maybe we are, and I want to believe we are, and I hope that we are, but I don't think that proves that we're right, or at least is not so obvious that we can say to someone else, "Well, then become Catholic because obviously we're right." I think you're missing some steps in the process that at least gloss over the valid objections that people have to the, let's see, the church's, the Pope's ability to kind of claim that title, if you will. I mean, we have the Orthodox Church that more or less claim the same thing as the Catholics, just in a fairly different structure. That being the lack of the papacy, right? I mean, why couldn't they be right? And so I think, so I used to think, well, yeah, we've got to have a uniform body, and that's great. And I agree. Like, it would be nice if there wasn't confusion about what we believe or have to believe. But let's step aside and say, okay, let's all take for granted that the Catholics are right. We're right as Catholics. Well, even within Catholicism, not everyone agrees. You know, you've got the, let's say, the normie Catholics. You've got the FSSP Catholics, those that are in line but are really, whether they like it or not, reject a lot of Vatican II. You've got the SSPX, who may or may not still be Catholics. You've got Sedevacantists, who claim they're the true Catholics and all of the rest of us are gone. and then and I'm sure I've left some out, right? So it's not as if we're this perfectly unified body as Catholics, even. So I think it just calls for a little more humility and acknowledgement that it's maybe not as clear as we kind of have sort of allowed ourselves to believe it is, in part because we believe it's true, right?
You're right. I think that there is something about, well, at least performatively acknowledging the legitimacy of the papacy, even if kind of like, let's say, Tim Gordon, Taylor Marshall, like those that spectrum. It's like you have a whole slew of podcasts that are about, oh, why the validly elected legitimate pope is wrong about everything, and but it's like there's still this performative, but I acknowledge the papacy, so I'm still in full communion with Rome, but our pope is wrong about everything. And then but it is this kind of weird, it's all like, oh, by acknowledging even performatively the legitimacy of the papacy, it almost covers you from, at least I'm not one of those lame heretical Protestants. I'm still part of the one true church, but effectively you're sowing division, and you're criticizing, it's like these types of trads are effectively establishing a kind of counter magisterium to what Rome has been saying the last couple decades. So it is funny that, if you really look at people's behaviors and all the divisions you mentioned, we are kind of behaving just like
Mhm.
a collection of Protestant denominations. It's just we sort of have this uh, protective covering of acknowledging the papacy, so to speak.
Yeah, I want to bring up Mike's comment here that he says the confusion arises from the piss poor post. Try to say that 10 times really fast. The piss poor post Vatican II catechesis, starting from mass internal rebellion in the 70s onward. I used to believe that, and I'm not saying that isn't can't be true. It isn't, but I'm not sure that's actually the actual that explains everything. I would, because uh, you know things again. I would like to honestly look back at what was the state of Catholicism in, let's say, the first half of the 20th century. What did it actually look like? And and I think about this as I look at my family, my dad's family. So my dad is one of the oldest of a large Catholic family, and he was born before Vatican II, but not really old enough to remember much about it. But you know, they had a lot of kids, and all those kids were raised Catholic, went to Catholic school if there was a Catholic school, went to church every Sunday, all that. And there's very few of them are still practicing the faith at all. If I'm being, I'm not being judgmental, but I'm just stating facts. And I don't think it's just a matter of catechesis. I think that let's talk about let's because I think they kind of go hand in hand. The whole sexual revolution, and a lot of there's this common cliche that people left the church because they wanted to go sin and all that. Well, maybe, but if we look at it just from a little different lens, this presented a time when I think a lot of people for the first time found their reason and experience to be in deep conflict with these kind of long-standing rules and beliefs about morality. And I think that what I was saying, that perceived lack of a really good explanation for why the church held on to these things, I think was the kind of the erosion of people's confidence in the institution. And I would say to some degree, I have that same internal dilemma going on. But so for a lot of people, they lost confidence in the church's credibility because it seemed to be so wrong on these kind of quote unquote old fashioned ideas. And I'm not saying they are. I know in the comments we're talking about how all the Protestants and everyone agreed onanism was wrong until the 1930s. Well, I mean, if you guys really want to get into that, I mean, I can do a whole different episode on sort of the pre-scientific attitudes about human procreation and all that probably contributed to a lot of that. But the long and the short of it is that when people find the reason why the sexual stuff becomes such a hot button issue is because it's something that profoundly and deeply impacts people on a regular basis. And like it or not, people can only disregard their own intellect for so long before they're going to choose the intellect over an institution, right? And I really think that was the precipitating event that led to kind of the mass exodus from the church that is still continuing today. I don't think it had much to do with liturgy and catechesis as much as that. That's my own feeling for what it's worth.
I agree, because I think to summarize what you know, the point that you made, really why it meant, like why that's the biggest stressor, are really two things. One, obviously, that one of the things we keep coming back to, and you keep coming back to, on the flagship UCM podcast, is that, like, it, you know, when you make it a matter of mortal sin, and you constantly put couples in that state of anxiety and survival mode, that's extremely distressing in the long term. It can really wear you down spiritually and emotionally and psychologically. But the other thing too is, because it's such a huge what's the word? It's like such a it's the place where whatever your theological commitments are, it's the area of your life where it's most embodied, and it ceases to be an abstraction, you know? Because if you're meditating on, like, the Immaculate Conception or the Eucharist, in some sense, it's like it's still very, you know, there's a kind of intellectual, profound quality about it, but it's not affecting something that's your very embodied human existence. And I think when these things have real flesh and blood costs, and they weigh down your relationships and the things that you experience day to day, you know, because it's not everyone is in an ivory tower where we can really meditate on, you know, how the Holy Spirit moves through history, or something a little bit more profound and spiritual. I think that when you really do have to confront these things in a literal embodied way, I think it changes the level of cost that you feel.
No, I totally agree. And I'm going to put Mike's comment on here because I think this is an important thing to talk about. So Mike says, whatever scientific theory was incorrectly held or not in the past doesn't take away the moral teaching on sexuality. And I think I'm going to respectfully disagree with that. I don't know. I'm in a sort of an ongoing conversation with myself about what do I do about that. And I'm not saying you're wrong, and I understand your position, but I think we need to talk about the implications of that just a little bit, because especially so the sexual teachings, for the most part, other than I would say the obvious things of, like, you know, not committing adultery and things like that, fornication, but, you know, all this stuff about gooning or contraception or whatever is not very clearly stated in the scripture, if it's supported at all, right? This is stuff that what's the word I want to use? I'm going to say develop, but you use whatever word you want. It became manifest over time in tradition. We have something called tradition, right? We have 2,000 plus years of tradition that, you know, stuff has become you know, stated, defined, you know, refined, however you want to use it. This stuff all came out of that, largely came out of that, and in particular, you know, the whole natural law teleology idea of scholasticism that supposedly supports or explains these teachings, what I kind of think predated the analysis itself, were supposedly based on reason in nature, not really divine fiat, if you will. It came out of just looking at nature. Well, they're looking at nature. They were they were looking at nature, and let's just be honest, they did not have a perfect understanding of nature, nor do we now, but we have a better understanding of biology and nature in that sense than they did then. And one of the things that they did not understand, and this is not a slight to them, they wouldn't know, but we didn't know until I think the 18 or 1900s that we have sperm and egg, right? They actually thought prior to that the human sperm is in fact a seed. It's not actually a seed in the scientific sense because it hasn't connected to the egg. Then it really actually becomes a seed. But they didn't understand that. They actually thought that each sperm was a tiny human person, and that it literally could be murder to waste that, if you will. We now know that's not true. Like, right, we know on a scientific level that's not true. Now, maybe that doesn't mean that the teaching is irrelevant or even wrong, but I don't think you can actually say that some of these moral teachings arose completely independent or weren't influenced by inaccurate scientific beliefs about the world. And and I think if we let's look at Humanae Vitae, because you brought Humanae Vitae up, is I think I've read the whole the book on the Papal Commission on Humanae Vitae. I am very much of the school of thought that Paul VI largely ruled the way that he did because he had to be consistent with Casti Connubii and some of the other things, more so than this is on its own merits the best, the correct view of things. They couldn't result in something that looks like they were contradicting prior teaching. And I think we have to just be humble enough to acknowledge that as Catholics. And, and even, okay, since the gooning thing, let's, what do you say? First of all, can there be negative effects of gooning? Absolutely. Does that mean it's always bad? No. I mean, that's pretty preposterous, actually. But with all things, either good or neutral can be bad, and depending on how they're used, and if a person develops an addiction to them and things like that. When Joan and I a long time ago did an episode on the history of masturbation, we went through some of the documents in the 1970s. I think it was Persona Humanae, but don't quote me on that. It was a document from the 1970s that was sort of the precursor to the 2352 of the Catechism that talks about masturbation. Actually, there really wasn't any official catechism teaching on masturbation that I can find prior to the current catechism. But in the 1970s, they were wrestling with this issue and had what I thought was a very interesting statement. They said, regardless of what science and the medical professionals might find about the effects of masturbation, even if they can show that it's not only not a bad thing, but a perfectly normal and at times healthy thing, we would not change our position. So just so we're clear about that, they're saying we don't really care whether science backs this up. And in fact, there was a discussion in the last couple of weeks on Twitter about the issue of contraception. And, there was things floating around about the harmful effects of contraception, and which I don't disagree with. But someone made the point that even if contraception was, had these amazing positive health benefits, the church would still correctly condemn them. And I'm like, really? I mean, why? Like that there's this, when there's an obvious conflict, or at least a tension, maybe not a conflict, a tension between these historical teachings and just basic science, for some people, you can't just like, oh, well, I guess I'll defer to the church. I'll go ahead and maybe you should. Maybe we're required to do that. Maybe you can do that, but your intellect will not necessarily follow along. And what that does is that can create an eroding confidence in the institution that I think then later manifests itself in other ways. That's I really think that's true for a lot of people.
I think you're onto it too, 100%. Sorry, I've been engaging with the comments, so I'm just sort of also having some back and forth. So thanks for keeping the conversation rolling. But yeah, one of the things Mike said was just we're seeing the consequences of the pill today: marriages not forming, children not being born. But I would actually, I really am of the opinion that the pill and various other sorts of fertility management tools, shall we say, it really is, those are tools to confront deeper problems. And I really do think the two biggest things are obviously the economy. I think one of our friends in the Discord recently posted some statistics about just the shift in how much buying power the boomers had with their $3 or $4 an hour versus like what we have with, I think for our minimum wage to keep up with what our the boomer generation had, we would have to be making minimum of like 25 an hour or something like that. But yeah, I think even in a place such as California where minimum wage is 18, so we have less buying power. So economic stress is a huge one. But then the other thing too, which many have alluded to, is we do just, there is a crisis of meaning. And I think when when the last several generations of human beings just lived through like, the dawn of atomic warfare and all of the stuff, the fallout after World War II, and just so much of what's happened since then, and now we're living through the war on terror and political chaos. I think that there's just a huge kind of gloom that's overtaken the world, and I don't think it's really fair to demonize the pill or birth control, because those are tools that people use. Now we can certainly debate the legitimacy of using those tools, or how helpful or productive or misguided or wise and prudent those things are, but I think people really hate the tool and are failing to confront deeper issues.
No, I think that's true, and I think I even want to get a little more granular on this. Is like this idea that the consequences of the pill, children not being born. Like, okay, let's talk about that for a second. Okay, what you're saying is we want people, because you don't have to use the pill, right? And even if you're using the pill, you can stop taking the pill fairly quickly. As I understand, I have no experience with it, but you can stop taking the pill and within a month or two become pregnant, right? So the like you said, the pill itself, or any other device other than, let's say, more one of these uterine devices or other things that have long term, most of them can be fairly quickly turned around, right? So what you're really saying is we want people to have more kids even when they are not in a state of mind where they want to have more kids, because we're just going to take away the effective ways to keep from having kids, right? I'm sorry, but having more kids, because you got to get over this idea that is a recipe for success. People to have more kids than they are, that they could believe they can handle and may actually reasonably not be able to handle. Just saying, well, we're just going to take away the safety net is just so short-sighted, in my opinion. And the other thing is this, the sexual revolution of the pill, I don't think historically it was common for people to have 10 kids, right? In all 10 kids live. Like, infant mortality was a huge issue in the past. Nutrition was poor. I think that, quite honestly, people just didn't live that long. I mean, what was the average lifespan in the 1800s? Probably 30s or 40s, right? So what you had in the early 20th century is we had developed nutrition and medicine and sanitation, where now people were having all these kids that they were making, and because they didn't have any way to not do that, I think a lot of these people that went after the pill were like, thank God we don't have to do that ourselves. Like, there's this romanticism of the 40s and 50s that I don't think actually resembles reality, and I think it also ignores how not every kid that grows up in a large family feels like that was a good thing for them. I think large families, I get a lot of heat for being quote unquote critical of large families. I have a large family myself. I think large families is relatively a good deal for mom and dad, but not for all the kids. And if you're not doing that because you want to, and you can support all those kids and give them not just the food and shelter they need, but all the other stuff, a lot of problems arise in those environments, especially if the couple is impoverished or like literally just lacks the ability to not have those many kids. That just creates a kind of, going back to what I said before, this recoil effect where now, shit, I don't want any kids at all, right? And so this whole idea that we just blame all these problems on the pill is so, I'm not even sure it's actually supported by evidence. I think it is more of an issue of correlation than causation, because I think it all came out of a set of circumstances that led to the sexual revolution, and maybe in some degrees, Vatican II and all the changes. I just think we have to disabuse ourselves of this idea that Humani Vitae and Paul VI was some sort of this great prophetic thing, which I just don't think it actually is in hindsight.
I completely agree. But like, just to extend, like, what's the phrase, like, extend an olive branch, or to like sort of find some common ground with our buddy Mike here. Like, I think
Mhm.
one, let's say, like, bad effect of the ease of access to the pill and stuff is I think it does
Mhm.
increase the risk where a lot of the younger generations since the sexual revolution, it's too easy to sort of make very reckless and casual decisions
Mhm.
surrounding sex. So I think one way that Humanae Vitae and the church is extremely important, the teachings and the wisdom of the church, is that I think we should treat sex as grave matter, in the sense that whatever your decisions are, it should be approached with discernment, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we can find agreement. Like, let's do away with all the threats of heresy and mortal sin and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think really still just having a deep respect that it is grave matter. It's serious. It's something that should be approached with maturity and
Yeah.
discernment. But it doesn't mean you have to, get all medieval about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think we should treat these things as serious matters, less so in the moral sense and more so in the weight of what's going on here. I actually think the notion of responsible parenthood should be on the level of a moral obligation for couples, because that's not, I mean, what are you told? You're morally safe to just kind of throw caution to the wind and do whatever happens, and God will provide and all this and that. That's sort of, at least in traditional circles, is held up as the ideal. This idea that I'm not even, I don't even have agency here. I don't have responsibility. It's not my job to decide whether, we it would be prudent for us to have another child. That's not even in it. The highest that the approach that's held up is just do whatever God will take care of everything. I i don't think that's actually, I think that's a little bit presumptuous. I think that's a little bit testing God, if you will. I think it in some ways it's lazy. I think people do that because they don't want the moral and practical weight of having to like discern and God forbid actually exercise self-denial, this and that. I think I think people that let's say Catholics that are considering using the pill, not just completely going through the motions Catholics, but serious Catholics that are considering using the pill, I think at least are wrestling and trying to be responsible about these things more so than the the opposite extreme, which is, well, we're just going to do whatever we want, whatever God, we're going to just, whatever happens, and we don't have to think about it. I have more respect for those that are struggling with this than those that just, kind of like excuse themselves of any responsibility and kind of leave it all up to God. I don't think that's the correct way.
Yeah, no, I think it is very difficult to reconcile that. I mean, I know that there's this balance of we have to trust God and not ourselves, but then at
Yeah.
the same time,
Yeah.
but then there's also the sense that we also do have a brain and we have these tools. It's kind of like, am I, by wearing a seatbelt, am
Yeah.
I not trusting God, or am I by looking left and right before I cross the street? Am I not trusting
Exactly.
God? I think the trust and the openness comes to life is that, when you're, and to be very clear, when your non-abortifacient methods
Yeah.
fail, I think you should, obviously where there's a zero tolerance policy
Yeah.
for abortion. I mean, I think in principle we're always open to life, but we, for practical reasons, you have to make prudential decisions about
Yeah.
how to, these very important decisions within your marriage and family. But just to be clear, just so no one gets any misguided ideas, like nobody here is at all open to or even would excuse abortion.
Right.
I mean, we're not
Yep.
here to we're not here to judge or condemn people that have made unfortunate decisions.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody, we all have skeletons in the closet. We're all trying to be better people, but yeah, it's just, that is a very hard line for us, and which is why we take, like, the discernment of when to be really truly open to new life. That's such a huge thing, and we shouldn't be so flippant about it.
No, I totally agree. And our good old buddy Jonah 2.0, you got to hate your life to have life eternal. I mean, I guess, if that's the standard, Catholicism is perfect for you. If you really want to hate your life, just become a traditional Catholic in the let's say the moral sense, if not necessarily the liturgical sense.
Doesn't that turn heaven into hell?
Absolutely. All right,
because now you eternally have to experience something you hate.
Absolutely. Give us that beautiful voice, man. I'm gonna take a quick break. You got to give us your beautiful voice and start dishing out some wisdom.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to. I mean, I go back and forth on this. Okay. I mean, I understand the cross is part of it. And as Jonah says, it's what Jesus said. Well, yeah. I mean, but I think that assumes. I think that wrongly assumes is that people that, let's say, don't follow all of these rules. Let's say they use birth control for a while, or God forbid they use NFP plus other acts, some other horrible thing, right? I think there's this wrong assumption baked into that people aren't suffering, or there aren't crosses in life like that we need to get rid of that idea. And also, at the end of the day, you have to be willing to, like, give of yourself, give your life up for your spouse and your children. And I don't think there's really anyone, birth control or not, that doesn't have that attitude about their spouse or their kids. I think you ask any of us, if I had to sacrifice my life to save one of my children, I would do that. I would do the same thing for my spouse. And I'd like to think I would do the same thing for my faith. Right. So I think the fact that is true in general doesn't mean that it's true in every application. That's my feeling, because as Joan and I often talk about on the podcast, when the kind of the most sacred space of that married couple is under attack voluntarily by your own decisions, that I'm not convinced that is supposed to be a cross that we impose upon ourselves, because I think you are going to face enormous crosses in this life. Marriage itself is difficult. Feeling loved and giving love to your spouse is always easy. Raising children is not easy. Facing things like cancer and the other things that life throws at you is a cross that that couples are going to go through, and I'm actually of the opinion that you're better able to virtuously embrace those crosses if that core part of your marriage is not under constant duress. That's just my feeling.
I think so too. I mean, and I know that maybe some of our audience members and some of the hardcore trads are a little bit resistant to data. You know, they're sort of impervious to new information. But yeah, even secular sources, a lot of studies really do say that if this one, you know, this private, intimate area of your married life is thriving and it's vibrant and it's passionate, those positive effects really do tend to, you know, assuming that everything else, all other interpersonal dynamics are healthy, there's nothing toxic going on, you're not just using each other for empty pleasure, but there's a real foundational relationship and friendship between spouses that if you have a vibrant sex life, I mean, all statistics show that the rest of your life also flourishes.
Correct. And I want to just to bring up Jonah's point here. You can't goon because it's hard to be pure. Like, okay, I could get behind that if we didn't also have this historical belief that a man or a woman, especially a man, could invoke the marital debt to actually impose himself on his wife, make her pregnant, even if against her will, maybe even to her, potential safety, because he can't be pure otherwise. Like this, I don't think you can hold both of those up. Like, I think you could pick one or the other. If you, so this idea that, gooners are somehow just not being pure or not, being sufficiently disciplined is just nonsense. I think that requires more discipline than imposing yourself on your wife. I have a real hard time with this idea that a spouse, especially a man, can just essentially force himself on his wife. That's horrible.
Yeah. And also the idea that this is about difficulty level. There's something about the difficulty level in achieving holiness. It's really wrapped up in pride. Like, the whole point is we don't get to earn God's love. We don't get to earn salvation. It's not about difficulty level. But what happens is oftentimes, you notice, like, through the years and sometimes just through the conversation, there's like a whole parade of different rationales for these rules that show up the further back you go. Like, oh, that rationale doesn't hold anymore. We have to go to a new rationale, because the whole thing is you need to preserve the idea that the church was right about everything, even when the previous rationale was wrong. So that you go back to the ancient times with the pagan Stoics, the atheist Stoics, and they kind of inject a lot of this stuff into the culture of that time, with of that particular time and in tiny little place on earth, and that fuses with a lot of the ancient Hebrew attitudes about men treating women as property. And a lot of the stuff we have now comes from like this fusion of like what the Stoics were doing and this idea of women as property. And and it's really fascinating to go further back and further back in time in human history and see what the rest of God's children all throughout the rest of the world and throughout the rest of the eras were doing and thinking. And to go back to your original point of this video, was like, this idea, human beings on broadly speaking have existed for 2 million years. Homo sapiens have existed for 300,000 years. The universe has existed for who knows how long. There's billions and billions of stars and nebula, everything. God loves every little rock on a distant planet revolving around a star we've never heard of. He loved every little lilac that existed 2-3 million years ago, and he loved every single child that walked this earth 100,000 years ago. And to think that he would have had only one, the only way he set up for people to connect with him, who he loves every hair on their head, was a religion that showed up 10 minutes ago. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. And also I think we just have to understand that it's not like these notions and beliefs, which is kind of like were given to us, on stone tablets made by God, like the 10 Commandments. Like this stuff all was, like it or not, very much influenced by the culture at the time. I mean, even Roman Catholicism very much developed out of the Roman culture, right? Things like genuflection, for example, as I understand it, was an act, something that Roman soldiers did to superiors. Like that, it is a very Roman type thing, but now we treat it as it is the way that we're supposed to, appear before God.
We attach all these sort of like eternal, timeless, cosmic necessities to things that like you said, like Romans and other pagan humans came up with one time.
Yep. And I think, I don't know what impact, if any, we need to what the significance of that is, because okay, so like going to Mike's point here, it doesn't change that marital exclusivity is good and gooning bad. I mean, maybe it doesn't, maybe it does. I don't know. I mean, I just think that I think we just need to understand the kind of the very human and organic nature of this process, and rather than defaulting to whatever approach makes us look consistent, right, or doesn't require us to, let's say, embrace our cross as a church and acknowledge some things we've gotten badly wrong, we take what seems to be the easy route, and we're just going to, maintain consistency for the sake of consistency. Everything else be damned, because that's what it feels like sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to, I think, and I want to be gentle about this, but I do think a lot of people's ability to have hope in the eternal, they have rested their eternal hopes on this idea that their religion has to be completely true. If their religion isn't completely true, then they no longer have hope. And I don't think it has to be that way. Even if our religion has a lot of truth in it, which I believe it does, I don't think it's necessary or even good that it's the only source,
I think we as Catholics especially put ourselves in that precarious position, because I think we of anyone has that not totalitarian, but that
totalizing,
maybe that's what it is. I don't know. There's got to be a word, but this idea that you have to accept all of it down to the last tiny piece of it, and then if you reject part of it, what do they say? You're not Catholic anymore. Stop being Catholic. Like that is that I think is. I think that is a very, very two-edged sword that, I don't know, creates a lot of problems for people, and I think is the reason why so many people abandon Catholicism, because they're like, okay, fine, I think you're wrong on this. Yeah.
A person who thinks a lot and who is honest with themselves can only sustain that much cognitive dissonance for so long.
Exactly. Yep. I think that's right. And they are not going to be brought around by coercion, by moral coercion. They're simply going to find your credibility more and more lacking, and they're going to go somewhere else. And unfortunately, it seems like for a lot of Catholics, the jump off the diving board is into an empty pool. They seem to just like, I don't want anything to do with religion. This happened to my brother, my kid brother. I had a conversation with him a week ago. He grew up totally trad. Like my parents were all distilled trads by that point. And he, for these very reasons, he just, I don't want anything to do with any of you. I'm the only one he'll talk to.
Wow. It's
rough.
not, yeah, man, it's not healthy to try to control people's thoughts so completely like that, and to tell people that if you don't agree and believe every detail that I'm telling you about, that this institution is telling you about God, that like that's gonna make people fly away. And I really hope, I really want there to be a way for to hold on to the hope of a loving creator, that doesn't land people in just like a hopeless place where there's no longer any relationship to that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I would rather find a way for people to be able to stay in the midst of their wrestling and struggling than to feel like the first thing we do is show them the exit, because that seems to be the attitude, is get on board, get it together, or get the hell out of here. That seems to be the default attitude of a lot of Catholics, especially traditional Catholics. And I don't think that's correct. And if it is, I question, I have to like re-question in my mind, what's the actual nature of God, and is God perfectly good as we believe him to be? I mean, that's, to me, that's the tension there.
Well, a lot of these conversations often boil down to, at some point, where with an apologist or something saying, basically appealing to just common sense. After you knock down all the ridiculous arguments or whatever, it always, it's just common sense. You shouldn't, for instance, like whatever it is, but to me, it really violates common sense to think that the creator of the cosmos, the creator of all the vast majority of human beings who ever lived and never entered the Catholic Church, has been basically cutting himself off from all of his creation that he supposedly loves, until and unless they show up in a Catholic church and perfectly paint by all the correct numbers. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the what they called the divine hiddenness of God, I think, is a real problem, because it would seem to me, and I'm not God, in case anyone was confused, I'm not God, but it would seem to me, if things are as, say, certain Catholics say they are, I don't understand how we would be in a world where there is, no visible evidence of God, if you will, in the sense that I would think that God would be coming and giving us reminders, or enough clarity so that every person has an adequate opportunity to accept or reject that. And I don't think I don't know how you could say that is true, right? So the stakes are high, super high, and there seems, I don't understand how we reconcile that with the relative hiddenness of God throughout history, outside of our Lord being on earth. I honestly don't know how you reconcile those things.
Right, and he showed up 10 minutes ago in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think these are all really, really important questions that normal, good people wrestle with, that I think we should be allowed to wrestle with. And I think the church is going to have to find a way to acknowledge these things and handle them in a way that is not just, get in line or get the hell out of here. That doesn't work anymore. That's not, I don't think that's the way God would ask us to reach out to those people who find themselves in that position.
It wouldn't make sense that he would hinge people's salvation on whether or not they believe the other human beings, the other
Yeah.
men,
Yeah.
telling them what an ancient book
Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
When that ancient book seems more and more culturally, the more you look at it, the more you realize how much of it just lines up with, oh yeah, you can see how cultures back then wrote things like that. So, it, like the whole Adam and Eve thing. Okay, so if the first human beings brought sin into the world or whatever, there's so many problems I have with that. But then, did he really? Why would he wait until most people have already died to show up?
Yeah. There doesn't seem to be a good explanation for that beyond, God's ways are not our ways, which, okay, I guess so, but you're right. It really is hard to understand how that makes sense within the context of our belief that God isn't kind of, a pagan, Greek type of God who has, is, kind of like
Storm god or
reactionary.
something.
Yeah, like our God isn't supposed to be like those gods, right? Like
Right.
The Greek gods had their own, foibles and whatever, but our God is supposed to be above all that, right? And how do you reconcile that? I don't know. I mean, just compare the Old Testament to the New Testament alone feels like a different God at sometimes, which is one of the reasons why during Lent I go back to doing the liturgy of the hours that has a lot of the Old Testament stuff that, quite frankly, I find pretty miserable to sit through, because it reminds me of the Old Testament view of God that it doesn't jive with how I believe, we're taught to believe God is.
People who, I've always struggled with the Bible, and just even listening to scripture in church, because my mind goes, I guess, like, I'm one of those people who we probably all are, where I start thinking, well, hey a minute, how does that make sense, right? And rather than just take it and, like, I opened the Bible, like, I mean, maybe 20 years ago, I kind of put it down, because I was like, it took me a long time to go back to getting a Bible again, because I opened up to Deuteronomy, where it tells a man to, like, basically have his wife stoned if she doesn't bleed on the sheets on the first night. And I'm thinking, like, okay, if I have to figure this out, I'm not qualified to I'm not qualified to make this make sense with a loving God. So I probably am not qualified to read this thing. And like, what oftentimes when I bring those difficult Old Testament scriptures to other priests or other apologists or people who are really into the faith, the answer is always, well, he kind of gave people these rules about, how to have slaves, and how to pillage other societies and stuff, because they weren't ready. He had to work with them within their cultural context and what they were ready to. But those same people will tell people that what people are used to today doesn't matter. What the culture of today, what people are ready to hear today doesn't matter. Whether you're ready to hear it or not, whether it makes sense to you or not, you have to obey it. Well, how come he couldn't do that back then?
Yeah, no, I think that's all very valid points.
Why did he have to compromise telling people, okay, well, this is how you stone your wife if you want to stone your wife? Like, by that measure, he should be telling people today, well, this is how you contracept if you want to contracept. But this is how you, whatever it is, like it. He doesn't work that way. The truth is the truth is the truth, right, Jonah?
Yeah, I mean, he apparently compromised in the past on things that we would say are absolutely non-negotiable now, mortal sins now, right? And so that I think is I don't know how you get past that paradox. I don't know. Which is why, for better for worse, I just stay away from the Old Testament and just try not to think about that too much.
It doesn't do any good.
No.
It doesn't do any good.
Yeah, I guess I put my head in the sand on that, because if I do, I just don't need that. I don't need that battle in my mind. I got enough other problems to deal with.
and then like I got into like the several years ago during COVID, I got into like the Jordan Peterson series on the Bible. And at first I was like, oh, this is cool. This is putting in a new kind of symbolic context. But then that actually didn't help me, because then I started thinking, oh, so is this all just some sort of like, like fable symbolism? This is all just, this is not real, like, you know what I mean? And I was like, okay, I stopped listening to that, because I wanted it to be real. But it doesn't make sense on a if you take it at face value. It just seems like some ancient abusive culture was saying, God told me to abuse you.
Yeah,
I don't know.
If I'm being very blunt here on this thing, I would say, how do I want to say this? I think it's as probable that none of this is real than it's probable that we are the unique repository of all the truth. And I say that as someone that has no interest in leaving Catholicism, because I think for me to do that, it would be a more logical step for me to, I think, become agnostic than to be like, okay, no, actually the Orthodox are the right ones, or some biblical Christian is the right one. Like that's actually feels like a much bigger leap of logic to me than that maybe none of this is true. But I don't believe that. I mean, I'm Catholic, I want to be Catholic, but I can't say that it isn't without a fair amount of trepidation depending on the day.
I feel you, and I think the well, I would say the advantage of going Orthodox or Protestant, or even staying Catholic, but not taking it like, oh, Catholicism is 100% true about everything. It's the only one that's true. The way to avoid just going straight from like a trad white knuckling on every point to just straight up losing all faith is sort of the because I think that Eastern Catholics are a little bit like this too, is just having a looser grip on it, like being like, it's appreciating the mystery and the ambiguity, and not holding tight to every little thing. And like, if you acknowledge like okay, so I feel as though my intuition tells me that if we have a loving creator out there, as I've already said, this loving creator has existed forever, and his creation has existed for an extremely long time. And people that he loved dearly as much as he loves us have existed for way longer than any Abrahamic religion that's existed. And he loved them just the same. I don't necessarily think that means that our faith has no truth in it, that our faith, it's just, it could be like, I view it as it could be like a if you shine white light that has all the colors through a prism, and then like the prism creates different colors, we could be in one of those colors.
Yeah, and I'm even willing to say, I think of all of the options, that I still believe that Catholicism represents the best version, even if it's not the perfect version as we are told to believe, but I think it in many ways represents the best option. I mean, like I said, there's so many things about the church that I love. I mean, I love the Mass and the Eucharist, the idea that our Lord left himself for us to, not just be here in word, but to be physically present and to nourish his people. That's a pretty awesome thing. Like that to me,
Yeah.
I can see that being a very definite fruit of a good and loving God who in fact wants to remain with us. I think the church's longstanding commitment to caring for the poor and being disciplined and being a good husband and father, and for some giving up the a family to serve other people, either spiritually, physically. I think those are all really awesome, beautiful things that most other faiths don't have, right? And so, yeah, I don't want to just lose all that, but and for me, I have found a way to lean into those things that give me absolute comfort and confidence, and to either ignore or not worry so much about the other things, because that's the only way that I have found to make it work. And this is why, I think I feel bad for trads, because they really don't give themselves, I don't think, another runway. They've Vatican II is wrong. Like it may be anti-popes, right? There's no other option. It's either this or nothing, right?
Yeah,
And I
or
feel bad
complete
for them.
despair and loss of
Yeah.
all hope and faith
Yeah.
and everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a good when you hold on to something that tight and you make something that rigid, you're basically setting yourself up for snapping at some point.
I think
And
that's
I
what
think,
happened to our pal Steve Skojak. I think that's a prime example of what happens when you're
yeah,
too rigid.
yeah, it's not a recipe for resilience.
Yeah. I think you have to be a little more flexible. I think the rigidity part of it it may be strong, but it's also can be very brittle. And I don't know what that sweet spot is between maintaining consistency and whatever, and also not being relativist. I know that's one thing that Jonah 2.0 harps on, and I give it. I agree, I get it. Like, but maybe history has shown that you can't. If you open the gate a little bit, if you give people an inch, they'll take a mile. Maybe that is ultimately the reasoning behind it. But then let's just say that. Let's just approach it that way, instead of saying, "Oh no, it's based on these clearly defined rules of nature that everyone can agree." Let's just be honest about why we're doing it.
Yeah, basically. Although nobody would, I mean, everybody at that point would acknowledge that. Okay, so we all acknowledge this could be BS, but we just don't want to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
But you're right. That's basically what it comes down to. And uh, I think what you know the hardliners and the trads and stuff like that who probably get annoyed with you and Midnight and maybe me if they hear me. I'm not as I'm not as out there as you guys, but with people like this who are actively, saying, I don't know, that doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense to me. This doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
The vast majority, I think, of Catholics kind of feel that way and just like don't take it all too seriously.
Yeah.
But those of us who are doing this, it's because we do take our relationship with God seriously. That's why we're constantly having these conversations, is because we do take our relationship with our Creator very seriously, and we're struggling to see that in the the scaffolding that we've been placed in.
Yep. No, I agree. And I'm going to wrap it up here, but I want to throw Mike's comment on here because I don't know if you're new to the channel, Mike. I don't recognize you from our past conversations, so I'm not sure you're perspective on life. I did ask you in the comments if you're married or not. I'm not sure if you are, but he says this whole channel is an exercise in wanting to deconstruct.
Yeah, that's wildly wrong.
Poke holes in the church teaching because you can't control your own impulses. I mean, I'm sorry.
Nope.
I'm sorry you feel that way. I mean, I don't think that's accurate. And if this is your first, well, first of all, if this is your first exposure to the conversation, I think you should check more out. But more importantly, I think we've been pretty fair and balanced. Like, I mean, this is what's so weird. This is what's so weird is like we're being treated as if we are just, can't control our impulses. Like,
I want to say something about that. Because look, I know you have sort of you've become kind of a magnet for a lot of this kind of people who are for one thing or what another, and your main thing with Jonah Prime has been talking about, like, the NFP and the sexual teachings. But there is setting that aside for a sec, because there are a lot of us who have wrestled with the faith in these ways, like myself, long before I ever wrestled with those sexual teachings. Those my questioning of some of those teachings came way later, and I had absolutely zero problem with taking those things to confession. If ever I slip on those things, just go to confession. That was never a problem with me. I loved going to confession. I have no problem with in all other areas of my life when I screw up or I hurt somebody or I know I did wrong, just feeling bad about it, realizing, man, I was wrong about that, and asking God for forgiveness. That is not the issue here. Like, a lot of us have been struggling with other aspects of making sense of this faith for way longer than we've been struggling with that, or having any problem just confessing it and getting on with life. The fact is, though, your channel with Jonah Prime has done a great job at delving into being like the only ones who delve into those topics, those issues of the sexual ethics, which a lot of grown people do struggle with. And it's not just about not controlling yourself, it's about families who don't know how they're going to make rent, and they don't know how to keep the unitive aspect of their marriage going without jeopardizing the wife's health or whatever. It's a lot deeper than just, oh, they can't control themselves. Like, that's very dismissive, and that's the exact kind of thing that sends people running away from the church, because they realize these apologists, and they come across like they don't actually want to understand you. They just want to point fingers.
No, I totally agree, and I appreciate those thoughts. And I'm not here to pick on you, Mike. I mean, you're welcome to be in the chat. I hope that you will get to know us enough to understand there is a strong level of sincerity in those of us in this channel, especially this group. If this isn't the right place for you, I mean, go hang out on, Tim Gordon's channel or whatever. I mean, you can have your ears fancied all you want, and you can hear everything that you want to hear. But there is no other place that I'm aware of where we're good, faithful people that more importantly want to be faithful, want to stay faithful, want to be Catholic, but also work through these things, need to have a place to be that doesn't seem to exist. And that's why we're here, and we'll keep doing this until the Pope tells me I got to take the channel down or whatever. But I hope you can just understand, Mike, that maybe your life situation is not quite like everyone else's. And I know, and I'm going to be honest here, I came to this whole process out of a lot of longstanding spiritual and physical sort of frustration, all this. And I know I don't have it near as bad as a lot of people, right? And a lot of those things that really, really traumatized me for so long don't traumatize me so much now. But I remember what it was like to be in my position, and I know from hearing from other people is that a lot of people have it even worse. And so as if we as Catholics cannot find a place for those people, I think we ought to really question what we're trying to accomplish here, and is this really the Lord's work that we're doing? I ask you to honestly ask yourself that. Okay, that was we've been going on for a while. I'll let you guys if you have any parting words, but otherwise I gotta go take care of some family matters. We have some big storm systems moving through the area that I got to get ready for. So anything else you guys want to say before we wrap up?
No,
you want to start?
It was great hearing you guys. Thanks for letting me in.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to join us. And for everyone that was in the comments or comes in comments later, we do appreciate it. Speak your mind. I mean, you can't really hurt our feelings, but I hope that you can at least take away from this and understand that we are just trying to be sincere Christians, Catholics in our faith, and I hope you're doing the same thing. And let's, to the extent that we can, focus on the common ground and a little less on the points of disagreement. I think if I could say anything, that would be what I would remind people.
Yeah, no, I completely am on board with you guys. And yeah, unlike the Reddit Inquisition, this will always be a place of free speech. And, you know, whether you're more inclined to agree with Mike or more inclined to agree with Jonah 2.0 or the three of us, the unholy trinity of Catholic podcasting, you know, it's just, you know, we're here for it. We don't want to be in an echo chamber. We're really here for meaningful discourse. And I think there really is a very difficult and sincere process of trying to rediscover the beauties of the faith, rediscover the beauties of the faith amidst, like, you know, the slog that sometimes happens with like this overbearing legalism. You know, it's, as PC said, it's like we are here precisely because we are taking it seriously. It's not something that we can casually toss aside because it's no longer convenient. But I think there is a conviction that there's something here that's worth preserving and that's worth hanging on to. And is there room for reform? You know, really is like a genuine good faith inquiry. Like, is there room for us to really refine our understanding in such a way that really is spiritually enriching?
Amen.
And however you reach out to God, however you go about praying, I would ask everybody to pray for peace.
Amen. Amen. Yes, definitely. Okay. Well, thank you guys. I enjoyed this. Thank you everyone who was in the comments, and hopefully we can do this again soon. So, all right. Thank you guys. And until next time, everyone, have a good one.